Welcome to my shop. Some people might call me a professional woodworker. I've been doing this now 15, 20 years full time to make a living. And I'm probably up on almost 40 years doing it as a whole. You know, one of the things we need to tell you about, we're a real small shop, and sometimes we might kick a camera or something get out of focus or out of view. We're doing it real time. We're not some stage production or whatever. There's nobody backs us, supports us, endorses us, nor do we endorse anybody else. If you see us using the tool, it's simply because it works. Sometimes in the course of making these things, it's kind of hard to know where to stop. So sometimes our DVDs get a little bit long-winded. We apologize for that right up front. But you know, you can always take that little fast forward button and get on down through there. If any of you guys ever have a topic, would like to see us focus on something and do a DVD, email us. If you have a question or a suggestion, our email is at the end of this DVD, and it's also going to be on the back of the box. The purpose of doing these for us is simply put to show you the way we do it. We don't profess to be the best out there, and we certainly don't profess to know it all. So again, I want to say, if you know some better way or you can teach us, we're wide open and really open to it. But no matter what you do, woodworking is probably one of the most rewarding hobbies and careers that you can have. But it's also very dangerous. So whatever you do it safe. Be careful. And you know, safety is between your ears. It's common sense. That's what woodworking is. A lot of people try to make this rocket science. It's not. If it was, I certainly wouldn't be doing it. When it comes down to your safety, guys, always protect your ears, protect your lungs, and protect your eyes. You only got one shot. Be careful, be safe. I'm glad you came to my shop, and I look forward to having you back. In this DVD, we're going to look at the fundamentals of woodworking. What are the fundamentals of woodworking? We thought a lot about this. We talked to a lot of our friends, both professional and beginning woodworkers. We talked to the guys that come to some of our classes. And what this DVD is about is the basics. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're going to do something very simple or whether you're going to do something very elaborate. Some of the needs are the same. And you've really got to think about that. And what the point of this DVD is to break it down, particularly for the beginning woodworker, to say these are the things you need to know. Most folks are show-me type individuals. They read it and they don't comprehend it. Most of the time, the reason for that is they don't understand the language, the terminologies, and they're as varied as there are wood species. You know, one guy's going to call something this thing, another guy's going to call something else that. And if you're the beginning woodworker, you know, the other problem that happens is you get intimidated. You watch the TV shows. You know, you can't cram but so much information into 30 minutes. And they skip over so many things. And the bottom line to it is they're designed for entertainment, not education. What we're doing is pure education, the best we know it. The point is that the information that's out there today is just phenomenal. You know, one of the things you may want to do is to go out on the internet
look around, find some chat rooms, ask some questions. And what you're probably going to find is that there's such a diversity of answers. And if you don't really understand what they're talking about, then you're going to become confused. We hope our DVDs help with that. You know, I've seen oftentimes the beginning woodworker, he gets into the fine woodworking magazines and he gets so overwhelmed and so intimidated that they just back off, that they feel themselves inadequate. Woodworking is just like anything else. It's a progression. It's crawling before you walk. And you got to walk before you can run. And that's what our DVDs are designed to do. Okay guys, in this segment we're going to talk about planning and purchasing your lumber. The first thing you got to do is you got to figure out how much wood you need. And you got to figure out what wood you need. You know, if you're going to make a tater bin and you're going to go to Lowe's or Home Depot or one of the box stores and you're going to buy some pine shelving board and bring it back and make something, that's fine. You know, pine is predominantly the wood most woodworkers begin with because they can go and buy. You know, pine is also one of the hardest woods to work with. It's absolutely one of the worst woods to try to finish. So, you know, there's alternatives out there. But you got to know where to get them and where to find them. And there's expensive woods and there's not so expensive woods. When you get into building furniture, woods come in an entirely different form than you go to the box stores and buy. Most of the box stores, they're already planed on one side or both. They're usually dimensioned. And you have a term that's called nominal and typical. A 1x12, for example, when you buy it at a home or a box store, is usually going to be 3/4 by 11.5. The same way when you buy construction lumber. You ever wonder why a 2x4 is actually 1.5 by 3.5? Because that's where it started. That was the nominal thickness, meaning that's what it started out at. Once it was dried and then processed, it became a 1.5 by a 3.5. Let's look at that a minute. Wood is spoken of, you got to learn the language. You know, you call a hardwood supplier up and you tell him I need some boards and I need 3 boards that's 12 inches wide and 4 foot long and 3/4 of an inch thick. The first thing you just told this guy is you don't know what you're talking about. And I can tell you from experience, you're probably not going to get what you want. You just told them you don't know. Hardwood suppliers in the hardwood business have a language all its own. Wood is spoken of in quarters. That determines the thickness. And it's usually always a random width. There's no specific set dimensions. Here's a piece of 4/4 walnut. It's usually 1 inch to 1 1.8 inches thick. It's going to come unsurfaced, look like this, unplaned in the rough. So its nominal thickness of a piece of 4/4 is 1 inch to 1 1.8 inches. But it's going to be designed that when you surface it, plane it, sand it, get it down to where this piece of wood yields you a clean plane or a clean piece of wood. It's designed to come down to a piece of 3/4. Sometimes you get a 7/8, but it's designed to yield you a 3/4 inch piece of wood. Here's a piece of 5/4. It's usually 1.25 inches to 1 3/8. It's designed to yield you a piece of wood that's 1 to 7/8 of an inch. Sometimes, if it's nice, clean, straight, you might even get 1 1/8 out of it. But that's not what it's designed to do. So if you want a top on something that's a full inch thick, this piece of 4/4 is not going to give it to you. You're going to have to jump to a piece of 5/4. And if you're dealing with really gnarly, curly woods like tiger maples and flame birches and some of this really curly wild stuff, when it kiln dries, it's going to be all over the place. And so you might even want to go to a 6/4 if they have it. 6/4 you find occasionally, but normally there's a 4/4, a 5/4. Here's a piece of 8/4. Again, the 8/4 is usually 2 1/8. Sometimes you'll see it 2 1/4, and it's designed to yield you a 1 3/4 inch piece of wood. Here's a piece of 12/4. Same difference. 12/4 is 3 inches. Usually they'll overcut a little bit. And sometimes I really have an issue with some of these mills when it says it's 4/4 and they cut it barely at 1 inch. And it's difficult for you to get a full 3/4 out of it. I don't like that. But you got to understand something. Boy, they're trying to get the maximum out of it. So piece of 12/4 is designed to give us what? Right. It's designed to give us a 2 3/4 inch piece of wood, not a 3 inch. And here's a piece of 16/4. Okay, it's 4 inches. Usually they're cut 4 1/8, and they're designed to give us a 3 3/4 inch piece of wood. But let's assume for a minute I want a piece that's a full 3. Well, normally it depends on the wood. If it's a piece of poplar, piece of straight grain walnut, it might give it to you. Might not to you. So all of that said, what the point of this is to understand the terminologies. We've got a 4/4, 8/4, 5/4, 12/4, 16/4. That's the language you talk about when you talk about the thickness. Now, you can also, sometimes you can buy, and the term is called S2S. You'll see it written out. What does that mean? It means surfaced 2 sides. Surfaced 2 sides means simply they've planed it for you on both sides. You can get S2S R1. What does that mean? It means it's surfaced 2 sides to a thickness you tell them, and it's ribbed or straight lined on one side. Now I'll tell you up front, having it ripped on one side is convenient, but it's not always perfectly straight. Okay, they slam these things through great big planers and whatever, and they get it down to a thickness. And because they have processed it does not mean that it's going to be flat, level, perfect, and clean. All right. Usually if I'm buying, now I'm going to usually be buying larger quantities. Just for convenience, sometimes I might have it, I tell them I want an S2S, okay, and I want them to skim plane it. What does that mean? I just want them to barely knock the outside off. I don't care. I don't want it perfectly smooth. I want it just taken off enough I can see the grain, and I'll final dimension it. Okay. As I said, you're going to find it in all kind of widths. It's always going to vary. The simple rule of thumb is if you can go pick your wood, you're far better off. But you got to find a good supplier and people who you can talk to and who can send you what you want. Those services cost a little more than just going out to a mill and buying 100 board feet of something. Acclimation DVD. And the drawer's somewhere around here. But let's look at it a minute when we're planning. We've got an 1 3/4 leg. We've got a 3/4 inch thick top that we had to glue up. We've got the aprons or skirts, whatever you want to call them. These are 3/4. So just in this simple little table, I've got to have 3/4. I've got to have some 4/4 for the top, unless I want it thicker. I'm gonna have, this is 7/8, so I actually would have used a little 5/4. Now I probably could sneak that out of some nice 4/4. Table's oak. But my legs, I had to have some 8/4. Now, I could have taken and glued 2 pieces of 4/4 together and got a piece of 8/4. But then I would have had a glue line show. And if I don't know how to finish, I don't know whether that glue line is going to show and look horrible or look good. You have to know that your wood can come with what's called sapwood, white on the outside of it. Walnut and cherry are the 2 worst. Sapwood isn't going to color the same as your heartwood. You need to know what that is. Woods are also not sold in the running foot. You go to the box store and you buy a 12-foot 2x4. It's usually 144 inches. And if you go in there and you look around, for example, you're going to see 8-foot studs to go in the wall. Or you'll see pre-cut studs, which means they're pre-cut to allow a couple 2x4s on top and one on the bottom to give an 8-foot ceiling. That's not the way hardwood is sold. Hardwood is sold in the board foot. What does that mean? A board foot is simply a foot square, 1 inch thick. So a board foot is a piece of 4/4, 12 inches square. That is a board foot. So when you're calculating how many feet you need, you can't measure this table around and tell the guy, I need a piece 6 foot by 5 inches or 6 inches, whatever the case may be, because that's not the way he sells it. You got to tell him how many board feet you need and that you need a minimum yield. Okay, in this case, if I'm going to use a 6-inch side and I don't want to have to glue 2 pieces together, then I've got to have a piece of lumber that's going to yield me whatever it is I'm looking for. And because a piece of 6 inches does not mean it's going to give me 6 inches. A 6-inch wide piece is probably going to, at best, yield you 5.5 because you've got to get it straight. If I was calculating board footage on a piece of 5/4, it's a different calculation. Because now I'm 1 1/4 thick. You got that? Piece of 8/4 is going to be double. So whatever I'm calculating, if I'm doing my 5/4, it's going to be 25% more. Piece of 4/4 gives me 12 square, gives me 1 board foot. Piece of 5/4 gives me a board foot and 1/4. A piece of 8/4, on the other hand, gives me 2 board feet for the same square, 1 foot square. 12/4, 16/4, 3 times as much, 4 times as much. And here's the other thing you can expect. Is a piece of 8/4 is going to cost more per board foot than a piece of 4/4. And the further up you go in thickness, the higher it gets per board foot. Here's the reason. Kiln drying this wood takes a lot longer, therefore more expensive. The other thing is that it's harder to come by a piece of 5, 8, 12, or 16/4 in a nice clean hump that you're going to get good use out of. It's a whole lot harder to come up with that. So the value of it, thus the price of it goes up. You got to know the terminologies. You got to know how to calculate what you want. It has to play into your design, so you have to think about it. You have to think about, okay, this table is made out of oak, but does the inside of the drawers need to be made out of oak? Maybe you want to do that. That's okay. Maybe if you're doing a great big piece, you want to use what we'll call a premier wood, oak, walnut, cherry, whatever it may be for the outside, but you might want to use some poplar or something less expensive wood for the drawers in the inside. You know, you get into a great big case, you're going to find that the wood that you use to make the drawers, the drawer bottoms, and all the mechanics of it can be far more expensive than the outside. You know, the old timers always used a secondary wood. That's the term. You have your primary and your secondary wood. The secondary is a lesser grade. It's not seen. You have to know, you have to develop relationships with suppliers. And that's not always easy to do. I've found that most of the guys that are in the woodworking magazines usually do a pretty good job, especially if they've been there a while. But you've got to know the terminology, okay? And if you get something that's not good and it's not right, send it back. You have to be the one to establish your standards. But you also have to not be stupid about it. Wood is wood. There's some more terminology, and we're going to cover that right in a second. The first one is that wood is also sold in various grades. What we just talked about was how to size it. Now we have the grades. We have FAS, stands for first and seconds. What does that mean? It means that an FAS piece of wood is typically 8 foot long and will yield you a clear face, meaning it's a nice face, in 90% of the piece of wood on one face. The second face does not have to yield as much. Then we go, some of them will, then with the next grade down is called everything, from a select to a cabinet grade, whatever. Cabinet grades or selects, for the most part, are usually an FAS piece of wood, meaning it's got a really nice face, clean, but it's not long enough to meet the hardwood rules. Okay? But if you're building something, you know, how often do you need a piece of wood that's 8 foot tall? So a lot of times, if you want pure clean, it's your better bet. Or you're building something large. A lot of times you'll find select and the cabinet grades to be about 6 foot. Some of them are shorter, but they're nice wood. The next grade down the pike is one common. One common typically means it's going to yield about a 70% clear face. Well, think about that. If you're building something small, you know, you're going to find that a piece of 8 foot lumber with a 70% clear, you can go through and cut out of it shorter pieces to get what you need. You're also going to find that when you get into the one common stuff, that it predominantly will cost you, I've seen it as much as half of what a piece of FAS is, and so forth. Then it jumps down to a 2 common and a 3 common. Okay? I usually don't go to 3 common unless I need kindling. But 2 common, you know, when you get into some of the maples that have some really, really wild figure in them and whatever, I've been known to buy 1 common. A few times I bought some 2 common because it's going to be full of knots. It's going to have all kind of whatever in it. And I still get a decent yield out of it. But a lot of times those knots and you can come up with some of the wildest figure in the world. You might have to repair a few defects in it. You know, typically where you find defects, you find figure. So if you're doing little pieces, that might even be a better buy for you. You got to know where to buy your wood, and you got to develop a relationship with your people to be able to trust them. Okay, In our next segment, we're going to come right back and we're going to talk about converting this raw lumber into something usable. Okay guys, we're going to talk about a few more things here about wood. You know, when you get in hardwood, you can encounter all kind of different things. You got to remember, they cut it straight, they cut it flat and square. But in the kiln drying process, it moved. Typically, the higher figured the wood, the more it moves. And here's some terms. See this piece? This is a piece of tiger maple in the rough. But this piece of tiger maple has got a twist in it. Now this has already been skim planed on one side. If I go to the side that hasn't been, it's a hole out worse. This side is still there. I got news for you. Planing a lot of times will not, in itself, will not remove this twist. And it's part of it. If you're out selecting wood, you obviously want to avoid something that has a twist. It's probably one of the toughest things to get out. Here's a piece of walnut we looked at earlier. It's just got a whoopie doodle. It's bowed this way and this way. Okay, well, you know, I might be able to get that out. My yield might not be as great because I got to take a fair amount off this side and I got to take it off the back side. You got to know how to do that. Here's a piece of walnut that has what's called a wane in it. And if we put a straight edge on here, we can certainly see it. This has got a great big old swirly tight knot in it, and that's what caused it, but by the same token, you'll see it in this piece of straight wood. And I've got to be able to get this straight. One side's convex, one side's concave. It's just that simple. So we have to be able to get the edge of this thing straight. We got to know what to do with it. Had to go grab this one back, guys. This piece of wood has what's called a cup in it. It's convex, concave, one side on the flat part. Okay, this is a piece of 12-quarter. If I had a piece of 12-quarter, odds are I'm going to be using it for legs or posts, for a bed, or whatever the case. So I may not want to surface this down to be perfectly flat at this time. What I might probably be better off doing is to rough cut this, oversize, to closer dimensions of what it is I want. Therefore, the cup is going to come out a lot of it. But here's also what's going to happen, is when I cut this piece of wood is going to try to, when it comes off the saw blade, this piece is going to, because of the area under here, this is going to drop, this outer piece is going to drop, and it's going to try to pinch the saw blade. Not real safe. We got to know how to look for those things and know when it's possible. If I had a piece of 4-quarter or 5-quarter that had a big cup in it, and I'm using it for a top or whatever, I've got to get this cup out. You know, great big heavy planers, we used to have them. And what typically we found was that the hold down pressure of those, when my board went through it, it would actually mash my cut board flat, plane it, spit it out. And what I had was a plain cut board. Using the abrasive planers, sanders, I don't get that. But again, if you're going to be making small, simple projects, a planer may be all you need. You know, the object of the game, this is just a piece of mahogany. Here it is in the rough. Here it is planed. Pretty good surface. Here's a piece of pine. Planed both sides. Pretty good surface. Here's a piece of tiger maple. Planed. Maybe on camera it looks pretty good, but it's got all kind of little tear out in it. Tiger maple and high figured woods don't like planers. Like it or not, planers are not quite as precise as they lead you to believe. You got to really be careful with them. You got to have everything set up just right, and you got to know how to do that. Dull knives don't cut as nice as sharp knives. You either got to have them sharpened, you got to buy new knives, you got to do something. You got to be able to maintain them. You know, any woodworking tool you buy, I don't care what it is, you got to be able to do the adjustments and keep everything running the way it should be. Rarely do you get one out of the box that's all tweaked out and set up. They get them close in a factory, ship them. You got to do the finals. A minute ago we were talking about buying wood. And I showed you this. This is a piece of pine. And if this was a long 8-foot piece, this would be considered definitely a piece of FAS. And it has to be really nice both sides. The problem with pine is, in the abrasive sanders, sanders don't like pine at all, because pine governs up to sandpaper. So if you're going to be using a lot of pine, you certainly want to go with a planer. Now, when we buy wood, we always buy 25 to 30% more than what we need strictly for waste, because you're not going to get every piece to yield everything you want. This would be considered a piece of FAS pine. So would this. Got some discoloration, but there's no defects. Again, if you can possibly go pick your own, do it. And you know, all this discoloration, when it looks rough like this, might not show. So to buy a little bit more than what you need to cover yourself is a real good idea. But here's the object of the game. Well, this has kind of got a gloss finish, and I hope you can see it. We did this in our finishing class. The object of the game is to go from this to this. You know, guys, I was reminded that I had forgotten something. The good old pure traditionalist, the guy that wants to do it all by hand. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a lot of fun. But, you know, you're going to have to know the difference between all your different planes and what does what. You're going to have to figure out ways to hold your material while you work with your hand. You're going to need to know the difference between a scrub plane, you know, a bench plane, you got to know how to sharpen them. You got to know what the difference in the angles are. Your various smoothers, what they do. You know, your little handheld block planes. You got to know the difference between a 1995 one that you buy at a home box store and a $100 one. You got to know what they do and how to use them. And you got to know how to keep them sharp. This is in processing wood. We're going to give you a quick little segment basically to show you the difference between an abrasive planer and a planer. You know, a planer, simply put, uses knives. A joiner, you know, there's joiner planes you do by hand. Then we have the power joiner. Whole different animal. This one's all, of course, by hand, a joiner plane. That's not what this is, but a joiner plane. A planer uses knives. So does a power joiner. You know, an abrasive uses sandpaper. You know, you've seen out here the little handheld planers, power planers. And they tell you that you can cut rabbets and you can do joining and whatever, you can. If you're building a log cabin or you're building a house, if you're trying to do really fine furniture, they don't get it. But, you know, if you got a great big hunk of something and you're trying to get a lot of meat off of it to get it leveled up or something, they come in handy. But I can take a nice hand plane and do the same thing. I like these babies. We'll be right back, and we're going to look at a planer work. We're going to look at a sander work or abrasive planer, whatever you want to call it, and we're going to look at a joiner very quickly. Okay, guys, we're going to look at a planer. You know, planers come in all kind of, like I said, sizes, different, whatever. We've just got a simple little 12-inch or 12 and a half, whatever it is. And you notice we've got a hose hooked to it. Either one that we deal with, we've got to deal with dust collection. We've got to address that. We've got to know what we're doing with it. Because we got to suck the chips off of a planer or the dust off the sander. But what we're going to do right now, we're going to kill the sound and just let you see a planer in operation. Okay, that's one light pass. I've still got some rough places, and I had to adjust. It took a little, you know, we just skim planed it. One side was already done. But notice this big, pretty, I love planing because especially certain things I like to see what I'm going to get. Because in the rough, it can hide from you. That brings up a point. You know, if you're going out looking for your own wood, might be a good idea to carry along a little block plane in your pocket. So you can kind of take it, knock some areas off the top so you can kind of see what you're getting. Now, you know, most of you, that little defect right there, you wouldn't want that. But I can fix that and use that as the front of a box or whatever I want to do, and it would just be absolutely gorgeous. Okay, we're going to come right back and we're going to look at an abrasive sander. We're now going to talk about an abrasive planer or sander. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is that this is a 37-inch. You don't need one of them at home. You can buy the smaller versions. They work equally as well. Again, depending upon what you're doing. Off camera back here behind me is a big Powermatic dual drum 25-inch 2 rollers. Both of these machines work wonderfully. But the same thing applies. I've got to be able to handle my dust collection. You know, you've got to know how to handle dust collection all through your shop. Here's piping going to a dust collector. I don't know if you can see, but there's blast gates. What do blast gates do? Well, they close off one pipe, open up another. Now, I'm going to say this again, in any one of these machines, you want to be to ensure, you know, good eye protection, hearing protection. Basically, the way this works is this is a single drum machine. Is you've got a drum with a piece of sandpaper wrapped around it. You've got some pressure feed rollers, and you got a conveyor that feeds it through. The little small planer, it operates on 110 volt. This operates on 220. I think some of the smaller sanders operate on 110. The sandpaper, you can buy it from 24 grit, I think up through 220, every grit. What does that mean? You got to know. You know, the lower the grit, the lower the number, the coarser the sandpaper. It's that simple. Now, You know, a minute ago I told you about the pine. This is what happens. It clogs up your sandpaper. But you know, if you're buying the right sandpaper, you can actually clean this off. They make belt cleaners, little naphtha, mineral spirit, soak it, take it off. But if you don't have the right sandpaper, it just destroys it. Trying to take a knife or something and scratching this off doesn't work. It takes the grit of the sandpaper off and it won't work for you. The other problem that is often incurred with the sanders is that they get what's called, just simply put, called a burn, and it's a mineral burn. And it's where the mineral heats up in the wood because we're going too fast or using too fine a grit of paper or trying to take too much off at one time, and you get burns. Again, there's cleaners and whatever will help you clean this if you have a good sandpaper that will take being gotten wet. If it's the real cheap stuff, it doesn't, and it tears easy. Here's a quick tip. If you've got an abrasive sander, there's nothing out here for removing a burn quicker, easier, and slicker than opening up with some compressed air. A lot of times it'll pop it right off. Okay, we're going to look at this operate. Again, we've got the dust collection, and it goes through. We're going to take that piece of walnut that we had that had that big whoopie diddle in it, okay, and we're going to see if we can flatten it out a little bit. Now, when we get to talking about sanding, we're going to talk about construction sanding and final sanding. We've got on here is a piece of 36 grit sandpaper. It's pretty coarse. But what we're after now is surfacing it. We're after dimensioning it, getting it straight and getting it level. So I'm going to use something pretty aggressive. But again, I want to remind you of something. A sander does not take off as fast as a planer. People often don't get that in their head and they wind up burning and having lots of problems with their sanders. It's sanding. Take it slow, take it easy. You know, this is a piece of walnut, pretty soft actually. And with that 36 grit sandpaper, I actually hit a little bit too hard. But guess what happened? Let's look down it. Pretty much got one side pretty straight. You notice I put it through on an angle. That keeps the fresh sandpaper constantly coming across. It also gives me a bigger bearing surface for this to lay on. Any tool that you have, again, you have to know how to operate it. If I had to make a recommendation, and I could only have a sander or a planer. Billy, you're standing behind the camera. What would be you've been doing woodwork, what, a couple of years? 2 or 3?
On and off for longer, but yes, more serious the last couple of years.
If you had to make a choice between a sander and a planer, what would be your choice?
I'd have to go with the sander. It just does more things for me.
Right. But considering the fact that the abrasive planers will pretty much handle anything you want, I'd have to agree with Billy. I think if I had to make a choice, I'd look at a sander. Okay, we're going to come right back and we're going to look at one more tool for dimensioning and dimensioning wood. Okay guys, this is a joiner. Now, this happens to be an 8-inch joiner. You can buy them, I think, from 4 inches 6 inches, 16 inches, and that has to do with the width. The wider, the longer the joiner, the better they are. Very simple. Which one should you get? The one you got room for, and the best you can afford. That simple. What does a joiner do? A joiner is used for leveling, squaring wood. We're going to look at it. First thing we do is it has a fence, and if we're squaring, we want to make sure that this fence is set square to the table. Joiners have in-feed, out-feed tables. They have to be adjusted correctly. Joiners use knives, just like planers. You can also buy them that have the spiral heads and whatever that allow you, so they say, I've never used one, I'll be honest, to get a cleaner's cut. Now, joiners can join a piece of wood for gluing up, for gluing two pieces together. They do a nice job of that. If you can't afford a joiner, then there's things you can do using a table saw to joint your wood and get it straight. This is that piece of walnut we had that had the wane in it. You know, the one where it was like this? And we're going to look at what the joiner will do. I have a wheel that raises and lowers it, that affects my depth of cut, how much I take off at one time. And I'm set kind of shallow right now, because all I want to do is get one side straight. So we're going to see how this works. Again, we have to deal with dust collection. You can either leave the front open and just let it pour out onto the floor and clean it up, or you can hook a dust collector to it. Okay guys, I now have a nice straight edge. Remember we talked about that piece of wood that had a twist in it? Well, we can remove that with our joiner also. Very simple. A joiner has a controlled surface. You might have noticed on our planers that in reality we have a big long bed made under there. The reason we did that is because the longer the bearing surface, the straighter it's going to get. If you're going to be using a lot of long wood, a little short 4-inch wide joiner, not going to do it. A 6-inch, maybe. 8-inch, a little better. Let's look at this and see what we can do with the twist. I now have a straight plane. Now I could keep going and just completely level one side. But odds are if I flipped it over on the other side to do it, I wouldn't get it perfectly uniform. But what I've got here is I've got one good straight side, even though I haven't got everything out. When it would go through a planer or a sander, which is going to be cutting from the top, it's going to mirror image this, assuming that my sander and my planer are set up to where they're parallel, everything's adjusted correctly, and it's going to uniform this. You know, the other thing a joiner does is a lot of times it's very, very difficult. Here's a piece of 16-quarter cherry. And as you can well see, when it got kiln dried, it twisted and did all kind of weird things. But the joiner can really help me here, because I have a perfectly square point here. I'm going to joint one side of this, then I'm going to put the jointed side against my fence, holding it true to it, joint the other side. It's going to give me two square sides, parallel and square to each other, which then on my saw, I can saw this side and the other side. I index off of my correct sides. Okay, let's look at that real quick. Notice something. This is a piece of curly cherry, and I'm getting some tear out. Now I was going pretty fast, taking kind of a hard cut. If I could have taken a lesser cut, moved a little slower, this would have been less. But here's what I was after. I was after getting me a square point. Now this is a piece of 16-quarter. Here's something for your consideration. On a 10-inch table saw, my maximum height cut is going to be only 3 inches. So I can't put this through the table saw and cut this side, flip it around and cut the other. It'd be very difficult to flip it over because now I don't have a correct surface here. Either the planer, or preferably better yet, is the sander. I can run this through on a known good surface, sand this, and it's going to mirror image top to bottom. I now have two parallel sides. I flip it, do the same thing, and I come up with a nice, perfectly square piece of wood. If I were doing a great big bedpost, I have the same thing. But again, a big 7-foot bedpost or a 6-foot one, you're not going to do it on a 4-inch joiner. 6 maybe. So this again is where you have to look at your needs and decide what tools you want. You know, we did a jig video, and we show you that if you don't have a joiner, there's alternative ways of doing this. So, you know, the options are in the hundreds out there. You have to decide what your need is. But here's the point, is that being able to properly dimension and size your wood has everything to do with the work before you even start. You got to be able to do that or you're not even in the ball game. We'll be right back. You know, one last thing about the joiner. You noticed several things. One is that on stuff that was close to the blades, we used a push stick. dust collection, ear protection. That's important. Joiners, like any other piece of equipment, can do the same thing Billy did with the camera. He cut my head off, but they can take fingers and hands. All right, now we're going to talk about construction. You know, again, this is nothing more than a synopsis. We're telling you things you need to know. And we're not telling you how, we're just telling you things you need to explore. And it all depends, again, on your world and what you're doing in your world. You know, construction, there's one basic rule, and it's very simple. Any good woodworking joint incorporates a male and female. Let's define something. Let's define what a joint is. A joint, and I'm not talking about you guys from the 70s. I'm not talking about that weed you put in the lathe and roll up. Not my thing. But here's what I'm talking about. Is a joint in woodworking is where two pieces of wood are put together with the intention of staying there forever. That's as simply put as I know how to do it. And there's all kinds of joints out there. You know, again, a joint is a male and female typically glued together that form a permanent joint, a permanent fixture, like a limb growing into a tree. You know, when do you use a dovetail joint? What is a dovetail joint? How do you cut a dovetail joint? You know, here's a little chest. This is called a through dovetail. You need to know when to use that. You got to know how to clamp it up. You need to learn to make little things that, these are a thing that helps you in gluing something is called a caul, C-A-U-L. You know, and like here's one that's just notched out so that the dovetail can protrude through. And we have forgas on each corner, obviously cut to length, that help us to glue this together. Do you allow the pins, which is the male, or the tails, which is the female? Do you try to dovetail it up perfectly flush, or do you let it stick out a little bit, then sand it flush? Obviously, the latter's the case. A little bit of chalk helps to keep things oriented when we're gluing it up. But once we glue it up, we got to keep it square. What is square? How do we determine? And if we do, how do we hold it in that way? This is, again, like I said, that's a through dovetail. This is being what's called a half blind dovetail on this drawer. Okay, this is a piece of mahogany, this is a piece of pine. When we finish it, what if we want to accent our dovetails? How do we cut them? You know, most of you guys out there probably think that this, you know, this is obviously a half blind dovetail. But you know what? It's really not. And most of you would assume that I'm a really good dovetailer because they're nice looking dovetails. And I've been doing this a long time, and I've cut a lot of dovetails with a saw and chisel. These were not done that way. How do you do that? Dovetail, the strongest joint in woodworking, bar none. It's been around for millenniums. It goes back to Egyptian tombs. The next strongest joint is a mortise and tenon. And that's simply where we have a female slot and we have a male tenon cut fit that goes in here. And it's glued. You know, you can also drill it and drive a wooden peg through. Old timers did that forever. You know, for years I did restoration. I've never seen a peg mortise and tenon or a dovetail joint fail. Never. I've seen everything fail around it. I've seen a little glue come loose, but I've never seen the joint fail. What's the difference between what's a butt joint? Simply where the end grain of two pieces of wood butt. This is an end grain to a flat grain. What's the end grain? It's very simple. It's the end of the board. And it's got to join into this one. You can't just glue it. It won't hold. You got to join it. You have to create a means of attaching the two. If you're gluing up a large panel on flat grain to flat grain, you can simply glue it. It will hold wonderfully. We've ran tests. You know, out here today, they have biscuit jointers. They tell you that you need biscuit joints. This machine's cut, this thing looks like a little football. This machine sets at a specific depth. It cuts half the football in one place and half in the other, and you need this in between on a flat grain. No, you don't. You know, there's all kind of glues. Here's a plastic resin, polyurethane. Here's a white glue. Here's a Tight Bond 3. There's a 2. There's a 1. Here's a spray adhesive. Here's 2 different types. Here's just a regular liquid hide glue. You've also got the ones you can melt in a pot. Here's a cyclonate, the instant glue. Here's the activator for it that makes it dry real fast. You know, here's an epoxy. 5 minute, 10 minute, 20 minute, 30 minute. The list is endless. Here's a filler. Here's an epoxy filler. You're not going to need fillers. Want to bet? When do you use all of these? Where do they come into play? What's the best way to make them? These are the things you need to know. Glues. How do you keep 2 pieces from gluing together? How do you clamp them together? Little clamps, squeeze clamps. Notice I got the end off of it. Really, I think I got all the ends off. Another version of a squeeze clamp. Sometimes you need to take the end off. We showed you a butt joint. Here's a miter joint. The guys, you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to do just like I normally do. I'm going to clear the table off a little bit. You know, we was talking a little bit ago about planing and ways to hold it down, just for your information. These little things that go down in the holes in the table are called a bench dog. Okay, what's the difference in a miter joint? What's the difference in a hammer and a mallet? This will dent your wood, this won't. This is a miter joint. Picture frames, a door maybe. How do you make them? How do you secure them? How do you hold them together? Here's a band clamp. Wonderful little tool. Really like it, great on chairs. A lot of guys will put a band clamp around to hold a picture frame. It'll do that. Provided everything's really nice and square. This is a cabinet clamp. Each jaw is 90 degrees to each other. Made to make a perfect square. It's wonderful for holding things nice and square. They're not 100%, they work pretty good. They come in all kind of sizes. These are pipe clamps. You can buy them that use a 3/4 inch piece of pipe or a 1/2 inch. They're typically used for gluing up large panels. Where we're using this flat grain, big panel, boards go in between, we clamp it up. These exert a lot of force. These will also do a glue up like that, but they're not near as strong. But by the same token, we don't necessarily need as much force as these will exert. Because the truth of the matter is, our joints have got to fit pretty tight. So either using some of our table saw techniques with the right blade or a joiner done right, our joints need to be nice and tight. gap-filling glues while they're advertised and they're out there, and there's some cases where they'll help you out, really don't offer the strength that you're going to need. And if you know how to finish, you're going to find out that that big glue line in your joint is really going to give you a problem. The pipe clamps. You've got every possible length and size, and you know what? If any one thing in a shop you can't have enough of, clamps. But depending upon what you're doing is what you need. Okay? You know, here's these little jobs. These are called the welder's clamp, welder's vice grip. Slick little tool if you use it in the right place. You'll see these out here. It's a little, two little points on it. It's got a little tool. Works great on a miter. I can set this up and this pinches in, holds my miter. Does a beautiful job. Problem is, it's going to leave a little teeny pinch hole on each side. You have to be able to fill it. Sometimes they're just wonderful. Other times, with a little jig and a little bit of ingenuity, you can come up with alternatives. And not use a clamp at all, but your own little jig that you've made up to do whatever it is you're needing to do. Maybe I'm not going to worry about getting this thing totally set, because I'm not going to. You need to learn how to make these. Simply a little wedge system. That'll take even the most stubborn miter and glue it together. But you know what? If you glue it up and you use the right glue and some little tips for reinforcing these joints, you got a beautiful job going to come out. Make sure you put some wax paper down underneath there, or you glue it to your frame. Here's the point, is that the list is endless. If you go looking in your catalogs and whatever, you're going to see every kind of clamp you can think of. And the reason for it is that depending upon what you're doing, you're going to have so many variations. You have to figure out what you want. So, all of that said to say that when you talk about the basics and the fundamentals, they're endless. And there's no way to cover them all in one DVD. I don't know that there's a way to cover them at all. In my shop, my coffee pots, it's just about as important a tool as I've got. In a minute, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about a few more things. Then we're going to get to our sanding and finishing. You know, guys, we were talking just a bit ago about joints and how joints are permanent. And we got to figure out how to make them. I want to define the difference between a joint and an attachment. You set a tabletop down on a table base and you put screws in it to hold the tabletop on. You attach the tabletop. There's a lot of products out there that you drill a hole in the back and you run a screw holds that butt joint, one to the other from the back. Okay, but I'm gonna tell you, it's not a joint. It's attached, and it's designed to be quick, easy, and get you through. They use a lot of it in kitchen cabinets. Kitchen cabinets are not designed to last for generations. What we do, that's the way we want it made. And in construction, you've got to, you want to embellish what you're doing. You want fancy profiled edges. You want pretty beads and whatever. And therein comes your router. And with routers come router bits. I'm going to give you a hint. If you get into woodworking and you want your family or whoever to give you presents and give you woodworking tools, buy your own router. Let them buy the bits. Bits, where you want to start, guys? There is endless as they can be. You know, routers. Okay. This is a router, actually called a laminate trimmer. Nice little handheld thing. Zit, 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 zit. Here's a plunge router. What does it do? It's made for dropping down into something. You know, you can guide a router. You have guide bushings that go into the base of it. Router bits have bearings that ride along the wood. You have top bearings. You have bottom bearings. You have bearings, bushings, bits made for cutting tenons, mortises, everything. Route of any single tool, with the exception of a table saw, I think. Yep, I think with the exception of a table saw, a router can probably do more work than any single tool that I own. Maybe except for building. You know, here's a fixed base router. This is a D handle. They make them with the 2 handles. They're making chairs. This is a multi-router. Some of you seen them on some of the shows and TVs. You know, it goes out this way. You know, it looks complicated. It's not. Moves up and down. There's a plunge router on the back. I can go in every kind of direction you can think of. A really nice, versatile tool, but expensive. Again, depends on what you're going to do. You know, Billy and I was going through here looking and counting, and I don't know that we really want to get into how many routers I own. I'm not a real fan of changing bits, but I do it for a living, and therein lies the difference. I think if I was going to buy one single router, if I could only buy one, I think I'd have to buy me a plunge fixed base combination. If I could only buy one. You know, I'll give you another hint. Be real careful in buying all of these router bit sets, because typically they've got 2 or 3 you'll use, and the rest of them, you know, buy what you need. All right? That's the best advice I can give you. We're going to be right back, and we're going to look at some more things that can shape wood. Okay, guys, you know, shaping wood, again, I like routers. Boy, they just do it. They do a whale of a job. And then you see the shapers. When do you need what? You need to know the difference. Here's a raised panel bit used on a router table, in a router table. When do you use a handheld router? When do you need a table? If you need a table, do you need one that has the fancy adjustment systems? Or sometimes they just have a simple little screw knob for raising and lowering the blade, the bit. You know, here's the big 3 horsepower. It doesn't have the base on it because, to show you, I took it out from under one of my tables. I like the horsepower it gives me. You know, for years, I had a little 1.5 horse plunge router underneath my table. Worked great. Do you have to have all the fancy gadgets? No. They're nice. There's differences between needs and wants. Okay? You know, we'll talk about table saws in a minute. I'll show you something that you can do with the router. As I said, here's a bit for raised panels on a router. Here's one, raised panels on a table, on a shaper. What's the difference in a router and a shaper? Well, look at that. Bits come in, you know, some bits just aren't made to be held in a handheld router. I don't think anybody out there would want to try to hold that puppy when it's spinning 20,000 RPM. I really don't think so. I'd probably slow that puppy down. Therefore, do you need a variable speed? Yeah, I think so. I like them. You know, here's the same little profile. It's just a little 1/4 inch round over. Here's the same one. This has a 1/4 inch shank. This has a 1/2. Usually not a lot of difference in money. Simply put, the 1/2 inch, a little bit stouter, holds a little better. If you buy a router, some routers only take, as in the case of the little trim router, or the little, trim router, what I call it, the laminate router, you know, the little one, it only takes a 1/4 inch bit. Most of your routers today come with collets. That's the thing holds the bit in. They're going to come with a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch. You know, how you protect your bits, keep your bearings on, maintenance of them. I don't, you know, this bit, I can handle that bit in a handheld router. I wouldn't want to hold it in one, in a real small one, but a nice, heavy, good plunge router, I'll handle that bit. But again, do it safely. If you have a router in a table, you need a good fence system. Okay, what is a fence? A fence is a thing that guides the material through it. You can take a router table, whether it's one you've bought, one you've made, and you can do most anything. Okay, I can cut a piece of wood out. I can decorate it pretty much any way I want. We're going to go look at a shaper real quick. Okay, guys, this is a shaper. You know, the old timers, we've progressed a long way. You know, here's a nice old hand wooden plane used for making a cove. This is what our great grandfathers had. Our grandfathers, they had a little bit more sophistication. This happens to be a Stanley 55, probably one of the most sought after old hand planes out there. It does everything. It comes with every kind of cutter head you can think of, profiles, this and that, all done by hand. If you're really into the by hand thing, good tool to have. Hard to find, and to find a good one in good shape, they're expensive. Billy really likes the Stanley 55. He likes all the profiles. Just for your information, and they got some cool ones. Ones you don't see in the normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill router bits out there. Quick note, our buddies over at Lee Valley, hey Billy, check this out. They're now producing the router bits that do the profiles the Stanley 55 does.
I tell you what I like about that. If I want to use that and I run into something that thing can't handle, I can keep a profile I like. I like that.
Yeah, I'm impressed with this. This is cool. You know, another way. It's called a scratch. You have a blade that has whatever profile you want, and you simply scratch it in. That's the way they did it. Look at your really nice old, you know, every bead, everything on it is just perfect. You know, the shaper. Typically, they'll have a 1/2 inch, heavier, 3/4, and they go up to 1 inch. Some of them 1 1/4 inches, the big, massive, heavy industrials. You can run all kind of different bits. You're not going to find a lot of shaper bits in your woodworking magazines and catalogs because shapers are pretty much more of an industrial thing. Okay, guys, construction, shaping wood, joints. You know, you're going to do things in the round. If you are, you got to be able to turn them. You need a lathe. What's a lathe do? It simply has 2 points. If you want to turn decorative legs, it goes between the 2 points. Okay, you have a spur center. This is the part on the end that has the spur that locks the wood into place. This is called a lathe center. If you buy a lathe, you want one where this rotates. You don't want it where it spins in the wood. This adjust holds the pressure. This is a tool rest. The way a lathe works is very simple. Lathe is the only tool where the wood is moving and the tool is stationary. Okay? Your tool is held against a tool rest and used to cut and shape the wood. You need to know the difference between lathe chisels. You know, these are made for turning. See this one? It's made for turning. You see this one? It's made for carving. This chisel, it's a bench chisel. It's used for chopping, cutting, Paring. What is paring? Paring is a term used when you slice down into the wood. Okay? Whatever you're going to do, here's a cabriolet lathe. You do not have to have a lathe to do it. But it sure is nice because we can use a lathe to shape the foot. You want to get a little bit more out there? You want to make finials? Okay? This is turned on a lathe. We turn the tenon. We use the drill press to drill the hole. We can turn them in sections. The lathe made a nice place to hold it to carve the flame finial. You want to do a carved rosette? You got to be able to turn the shape. You can carve the whole thing, but if you can turn this out and carve the face, a whole lot easier. If you want to do something where you're holding it and turning it freehand and you don't want the spur, you have chucks that'll mount to a lathe that will hold it for you. You want to turn bowls, plates, things of that nature, you need to faceplate turn it. This screws onto the lathe and the bowl or plate or block of wood attaches to it. You have to know how to attach it. But if you just want to do some turning, a lathe's a nice thing to have. But if you also need to have tools, calipers. These are tools that measure diameters so that you can get each one just right. It's down the line. That's shaping wood in a nutshell. This is a bandsaw. Why is it a bandsaw? Because it has a continuous band that goes all the way around. Okay, usually you buy your saw blades, they're going to come rolled up in a box or whatever. This is a 1/4 inch blade. Here's an 1/8. Here's a 1/2. You're going to see them listed in how many teeth per inch. It's very simple. Just like sandpaper. The fewer the teeth, the more aggressive. Got it? The thinner the blade, the easier you can turn it. This is a Delta bandsaw. I've had it forever, and this has a riser on it. What is that? It opens this up. When you hear the term bandsaws, you'll hear a 14 inch, 20 inch, 10 inch. They refer to the distance from the blade to here. That's called the throat. Okay? That's what they're talking about, is the throat. How far you've got it. You've got this guy's the blade. Keeps it in line. You have tension that holds the blade. You have to know how to tune your bandsaws. You have to know what blade does what. 1/4 inch blade, this is just a little pattern I grabbed. It's what I would use for cutting a scroll or a pattern out. I can take and cut this out of a piece of plywood, and that's what happened here. Get everything, sand, get everything just right. Then I can actually mount this on a piece of wood, trace it out, cut the one I'm going to use, and I can use a router with what's called a flush trim bit, and I can go through and using this for the bearing to run on, I can replicate as many as I want. This is actually a half pattern. I only do half of it. And I'll take and I cut one side out, then I flip it over and do the other side. Everything's perfectly even. You can use a bandsaw to cut a multitude of shapes, more than I can even go in. You can cut circles, you can do all kind of things. The predominant use of it is to cut scrolls. If you need to cut a tighter scroll, you can go to an 1/8 of an inch blade. Another really dominant issue, or use rather, of a bandsaw is to do what's called resawing. Resawing is simply where we take a piece of wood and we want to split it or cut pieces off of it. We want to make multiple pieces out of it. And it involves running the going down through it. Kind of like the sawmill did in making 2 pieces out of 1. It's extremely beneficial in making taking a thicker piece and making drawer fronts, for example, that are all out of the same piece of wood. 1/4-inch blade would not do it. You would want to go to at least a half. In some cases, on a regular bandsaw, you can buy a 3/4. The little 10-inch bandsaws that mount on a bench, they don't have enough horsepower. If you're going to be doing resaw, then you maybe want to look at something a little bigger. The wider the blade and the fewer teeth, the better they resaw, because the more aggressive they'll cut. For typical home use, unless you're going to be cutting big stuff, a 1/2 inch is usually sufficient. You need to learn how to control it. All of this is discussed in our jigs and pictures. There's just not enough time here to go in it. I'll give you a tip. A 1/2 inch resaw bandsaw blade, we've tried them all, and the best one out there is sold by a company called Highland Hardware. Don't mind mentioning, it's the best resaw bandsaw blade I've ever seen. If you really want to get real small little stuff, look into a scroll saw. You know, while we're over here, Billy, can you focus on this? This is a belt sander. Somewhere along the line, I did away with the wheel that went on it. This is the wood tech I bought at Woodworker Supply. I don't even know how long ago. And she's been through a lot. I use it for all kinds of things. Smoothing an edge. Finalizing a shape. A really versatile machine. Is it an absolute necessity? No. It's just not. Drill press. Is it an absolute necessity? No, it's not. But if you're going to be doing precise drilling operations, you can also put what's called a drum sander. It's made to fit in a drill press. It's a round tool. It's round, got a sanding sleeve on it. You can put it in here and you've got a drum sander, sanding different profiles. We do a lot of drilling. Okay, you can buy vices that go on here, and then there's all kind of jigs you can make to use with it for securing and holding odd shaped things and whatever. Okay, guys, we're going to talk a little bit now about cutting wood. Again, there's a ton of ways. You know, you got the old way, which I like. You got the carpenter's way. These have a place. These are not real good for miters. When you cut and fine detail. That skill saw sometimes come in pretty handy when you got a big old hunk of something and you just need to get an end off of it. It's too heavy for you to handle. It'll help you whack it down a little bit. They're pretty good for tree limbs too. Hand saws. Regular old carpenter's hand saw. Simple as that. I got a guard on here, guys. I ain't sawing my finger. You know? Again, just cross-cutting something. Then we get a little more specialized. Here's a nice back saw. Back saw has a good solid rib on it. Nice straight blade. Usually used for ripping. You can cross-cut with it because the stiff blade helps you stay with a good straight line. Then you get specialized. Dovetail saw, hand cutting dovetails. This is an American made, or we'll call this a Western. It cuts on the push. Here's a Japanese saw. It has two different sets of teeth on it. One's coarse, one's fine. One's made for ripping. One's made for cross-cutting. You can get them in finer teeth for dovetails. They cut on the pole. Everybody knows what this is. You don't have a bandsaw, get you a good jigsaw. You can buy every kind of little small blades, scroll blades, heavy blades, all kinds. Until you can afford a bandsaw, these work. Buy jigsaws, this is just cute. This is one of those wants, not needs. I don't think I've ever used it. Ain't that a hoss? The point is, you got to decide again what you're going to do. But here is typically the workhorse of the shop. This is the guy that does 98% of the work. It's a table saw. Now, the list of the things this thing will do is just endless. In our jigs, in our table saw DVD thing, we go into a lot of detail about this. Here's the thing I'm going to tell you. You got to, whatever you're going to do, I'm going to say this again, buy the best you can afford. And if any place in your shop you don't want to compromise, it's right here. You have basically this is a fine glue line rip blade, but it's also fine enough for cross cuts. This is a combination blade. What's that mean? It means that the teeth on them are designed where they will accommodate both a rip and a cross cut. A cross cut is simply put where you're cutting something to length. One of the biggest no-nos, the biggest no-no in a table saw is never ever try to take something small of any sort, cut it like this, with this to the fence, and this is the fence against the blade. If you get the least little twist in here, it's going to come throwing back at you. Never ever make a cut where this is against the fence, even what this is called a miter slide. It fits in the grooves on a table saw, and it's used to guide the wood through the blade. The same reason is it can pinch and throw back at you. This is typically, the miter slide is going to come with your saw, and it's going to come with a big guard on it. Ours is removed so we can show some cutting techniques in some other DVDs. This thing is called a splitter. Okay? It keeps the wood from pinching. Most guys beginning don't understand that solid wood of anything, even plywood, when you cut it, you can release pressure. And when you release the pressure, that piece of wood can come in and it'll pinch against the blade. Or sometimes I've seen them where they go out and halfway through the cut, you got a thing out here that looks like a big Y. Splitter helps keep it from pinching on you. Also helps keep you tight to the fence. Cutting grooves, that thing called dados. And this is where we plow a groove in a piece of wood for another piece of wood to fit into. You have dado blades. They usually consist of two blades. One goes on the outside. Then you have, these are called chippers, and they go on the inside. And what we can do is we can stack these, called a stackable dado. We can stack them up to make whatever thicknesses that we want. We can even buy little shims to tweak them out a little bit if we need Now you're going to see Dado Blades out there. Some of them call wobble, some of them call adjustable. Let's just suffice to say, I've never been a big fan of putting something on my saw that's already crooked. This is a radial arm saw. It goes this way, it goes this way, you know, moves up and down. I can set it this way for miters, straight on for straight. I can go that way. I can go this way. They're real handy to have around. Actually, this is probably one of the first saws I ever had. Radial arm saws have a really bad quirk. The blade is turning in this direction toward me. See these teeth? They're pulling toward you. You ever seen a bulldozer? You see the cleats that are on the tracks? They bite in and they pull. It's called tracking. Okay? And if you get in here and you don't have the right blade and you're slamming, you can pull this thing and next thing you know, this whole thing just shoots out at you. Be careful. Alright, they make special blades for radial arm saws. It still doesn't stop. We're going to come right back and we're going to look at one more saw. Alright guys, this last saw we're going to look at. It's simply a chop saw. Everybody knows what these are. These puppies use the big old, this is a 10-inch, 12-inch. I was going to look up here a minute. This blade looked kind of rough. We was using it to cut some PVC and stuff we were doing. We were putting the shop together. This is kind of the blade that comes on it. It's a big old coarse blade, and simply put, it's made for construction. It's made for 2x6s, 2x8s, 2x4s. That's what it's made for. You notice this is a super fine tooth blade. This thing is made for cross cutting, all kind of various angles. You can go back here. Cut this way, you can lean it this way and do all kind of compound miters and everything. And they're real handy. The only objection I have to most of the chop saws out there is that, again, they're made for construction. Even with the super fine tooth blades, they just don't give the cuts that we like, okay? We use it all the time. Don't misunderstand. And they all have a place. We've gone through a lot of them. But again, be safe with it. The biggest problem with this saw is right there. A lot of guys have they also make the one that's a radial, comes out, cuts. Here's something I'm going to tell you. They don't usually tell you. Most people think it's made for cutting this way. And it will do that. But just like that radial arm saw, it'll track forward. A nice way to do it is to bring it out, down, and let it cut on the return. Okay? We're going to come back, guys, and we're going to talk about sanding, and we're going to talk about finishing. Man, there's almost as many sanders out there as there are saws, saw blades. Maybe not as many as there are finishing products, but they're close. In our shop, we use pneumatic air. We have a big air compressor. It's a really good way to go. We're able to get a lot more tools using pneumatic than we are electric. Pneumatic tools last longer than electric. The problem with them is that you got to have a big air compressor. I'm going to tell you, you need a minimum of 180 gallon or an 80 gallon 5-horse. You need to check what's called the CFM, that's cubic feet per minute each tool pulls. and you need to make sure that the air compressor can maintain it. There's a big difference. You know, the little compressors with the wheels and the little ones you use for air nailers you see out here and whatever, they don't run air tools. Air tools pull a lot of air. Probably this tool right here, this is an auto body thing. You're not going to see this out. You will see it out here, okay? But it hasn't really gotten over into the woodworking world yet. It's called an inline sander. What does it do? That's what it says. It sands in a line. This is the random orbit. Back in the day when I was doing body work and whatever, this thing, they called it a DA. It stood for dual action. Air-operated tools are a little bit more aggressive. This is the typical electric random orbit sander. Got the little thing for catching dust. Air tools don't. Air tools, you can get the hook and loop. This is a PSA. It stands for pressure sensitive adhesive. When you buy your sandpaper, it typically has a little thing that you can peel off the cover and it sticks to the pad. You can get them in a hook and loop. This is a hook and loop paper, typically used on these. The advantage of a hook and loop is that you can actually put it on, peel it off. They have holes in them for the vacuum. And it attaches kind of like in a Velcro attachment. And they do quite well. They're electric. They're bigger. These are the little detail sanders. We just got this one. Haven't had it long. And one of the things was we bought a couple of them. We just didn't see them doing a good job. This one does. This one came in a kit. It's got all kind of attachments. Getting up in corners, little saw blades. It's a nice tool. It's not a cheap tool. Do you need this starting out? No. Do you need this starting out? No. This would probably be, if I was starting out, this would be my choice tool. Not necessarily this brand. Billy happened to bring that in. I'm going to show you this real quick in the pneumatic. It's used in the body shop. Now you can see we've used this puppy from time to time. I can go to the auto body supply store and I can buy these. This happens to be a 36 grit. Man, I can move some wood. Then you got the good old fashioned hand sand, block sand. Never sand against the grain. That means across it. Always sand with the grain. You've got every kind of gadget and gizmo out there that you can think of to help you sand. These things, some of them call them profile sanders. You'll see them advertised as tadpoles. Simply a piece of rubber. A little piece of sandpaper wraps around, and you use it to sand profiles on moldings. Are these a necessity? Yeah. They do a good job. They're not very expensive, and they really, really do a nice job. I bet we've got 50 of them around here. You can buy all kind of different little sanding sponges that help fit into profiles. Here's a quick tip. When you're sanding a profile on something, never sand a profile like this. Sand it long. Okay? I hate to say this, but it's the truth. The little profile sanders that are used to just you don't get that nice, long, crisp sanding. Again, we have a DVD that's hours on sanding. Why? You know, you've got flexible sandpaper. You've got sandpaper comes in rolls. You've got the PSA. You've got the hook and loop. This is called a sterrated. It's used for sanding between coats of finish. Here's the same product used to be used on a random orbit sander. When and where should you use it? These are little sanding sponges. They're predominantly made for finishing. Sometimes they're advertised out there for use in final sanding. If you use the wrong grit, you got a problem. That's the case with any of them. Then we got the one everybody likes to buy, the good old-fashioned belt sander. Do you need one of these when you're starting out? No. Big time no. Those guys have another name. It's called a project record. It's a well-deserved name. These take a lot of time and a lot of practice to learn how to master. Okay? They remove a lot of wood and they do it quick. Sanding is about two things. There's two types of sanding. You got a construction sanding, which means you're removing wood, shaping wood, doing this. Then you have a final sanding. You have finish sanding. It goes on. You know, in the sanding, we also talk about the old way of doing it, scrapers. What do scrapers do? Just what they said. But you notice, I'm getting all kind of different results. You got to know how to sharpen them. You got to know how to get your bevels and your hooks and things on them right. They're not difficult. Here I'm getting a little fine sanding powder. Here I'm getting a thin shaping. Here I'm getting a little more shaping. You have specialty shapers. It's called a gooseneck. You're doing a crown molding or something, it's used to get in and scrape the crown. You can scrape them silky smooth. You know, you have all kinds of scraper flings. When to use them, when not. Is it better to sand? Is it better to scrape? You can buy sandpaper in every configuration. I've got sandpaper in the back that I can use on my random orbit. That's 1,000 grit. I can use it for actually working out a finish if I have the right finish. You can buy sandpaper that'll hold up in water. It's called wet or dry. It's predominantly in the woodworking industry and in the auto body industry. It's predominantly used for sanding out superfine and finishes. You can buy it in grits from way down in the 80s up through the thousands. You can buy it in the 3,000, 4,000, 2,500, all over the place. You know, and sharpening. Now, why would we have sharpening and sanding? Because that's what you're doing. A couple whetstones, best way to keep them nice and flat is rub the two together. Couple them together. Each one, read them, they have different grits. They do different things. Always store your stones in water. This isn't a sharpening thing. But you know, you really need to know how to sharpen. Here's a slick little trick. Take you some wet or dry sandpaper. Lay it on a piece of glass. This is the way I've done it forever. I'm seeing in some of the woodworking catalogs, they're starting to come up. You can use a piece of glass, a piece of granite. I went by a glass guy, he gave me this hunk of 1/4-inch plate, and I take my, and like I said, I can go all the way up into the thousands. I can take this and I can sharpen a plane, a chisel, just like, to whatever I want. Do you need a piece of glass and some sandpaper or a piece of granite or some good hard surface? Yeah, you do. It's a slick way to sharpen. Up until the point you need to know how to sharpen better and more. You know, a hand plane, when you're hand planing a piece of bird's eye maple, it's got to be as sharp as any carving chisel. Carving chisels have to be immensely sharp. You're using sharp tools, be careful. The point of what I'm trying to show you, in our sanding, here's a sanding block. Simply a piece of sandpaper, a set piece of PSA glues onto it, and we use it for sanding. We got a slick little trick for making sanding blocks to any profile that we want, because we do so many. I can put a piece of sandpaper on it and I can sand it, because none of these would fit the profile I needed, so I had to make one. It takes about 10 minutes and it'll make any profile I desire. When we come back, we're going to talk about finishing, and that's going to conclude this DVD. I'm going to reiterate again. The possibilities are endless. We've showed you some of the stuff that's out there, and we've talked about it as much as we can. We hope it hasn't been confusing. We've tried to keep that from happening. But there's a lot of different variables. We'll be right back. All right, guys, I'm sitting here in front of a table full of tools, and we're going to talk about them in just a second. We're wrapping this up. At this stage, we're going to talk about finishing. That's really all I know to do. Finishing is a subject that is so vast. Every book you read, every article you see, every television show you watch, there's somebody out there using some kind of special concoction. And you know what? If there's one common denominator among all of them, you ever noticed on the TV shows, they tell you, we put a little bit of this on, we do this in between and put a little wax on it, or we brush this on, and then next thing you know, they show you it all complete. That's because it's an issue very few people really want to address, because it's so tough. We did our finishing DVD, and it's probably the toughest of anything I've ever done. The first time I started finishing anything, I was about 13 years old. I'll soon turn 54. Not that I'm telling my age, I'm just telling you how long. I have finished, I mentioned I did body work. I was the guy that was in the 70s out doing the scenes on the vans and the trick painting and all of this stuff. I've been doing wood all of my life. I have finished, I think, almost anything and everything. And I still haven't learned it all. But one of the common denominators that I always see in everything I read on a can, I see in an ad, is simply put, is that you smear this on, you wipe this on, or you spray this on, and presto, it's going to come up just beautiful. The truth of the matter is there's more misinformation about finishing than there is good information. And if you go out there and start looking around, you're not going to have a clue. But I'm going to categorize finishes into a couple simple categories for you. You have penetrating finishes. These are predominantly your oil finishes. But you've got tongue oil. You've got pure tongue oil. you've got linseed oil, you've got oil varnish. I mean, it just goes on. The truth of the matter is, oil finishes do exactly what they say. They soak into the wood. Some of them take forever to dry. I was reading an article yesterday about some mixture some guys got, and he says, you know, you put a coat on, you let it dry 2 weeks, put another coat on, let that dry 3 or 4 weeks. Well, you know, if you want to spend several months getting the finish on something, go for it. The problem with it is that you're not going to get a very durable finish. I don't care what they say. Those are just the facts. You've got the sprayed finishes. They buy in large and by far give the most durable finishes going. And they are the easiest to apply. If you're set up, if you have the equipment, and if you learn how to do it. Those are called film finishes. These are finishes that lay on the wood. We've got some good white bone finishes that are also film finishes. You have shellacs. These are finishes that dry well, dry hard, seal the wood. They're not real strong when it comes to water alcohol. You can take a shellac and put a polyurethane over it. If you do it right, polyurethane makes a good finish. But did you know that polyurethane, you got to sand between every coat, because polyurethane doesn't adhere. Adhere means it doesn't eat in. Shellac, one coat of shellac on top of another, it eats in. One coat bonds to the next. Lacquers do the same thing. Polyurethanes don't. Lacquers and shellacs produce hard finishes. Hard finishes are something that can be polished or buffed or rubbed, like glass, rocks, diamonds. These are things that are hard, and they produce a hard finish. And the reason that, but hard finishes scratch a little easier. We have tough finishes. Polyurethane is a tough finish. In Bob Flexner's book, he had the best analogy I've ever heard. Polyurethane is a tough finish. It's like your automobile tire. It's not going to scratch easy, and it's really tough. And while you can do it, it would be a whole lot harder to buff that up to a nice shine, if that's what you want. But it protects well and it holds up great. If you use the lacquer or shellac material, then you can buff it to a nice high gloss if you wanted to. Or you can make it look like there's no finish on there at all, but yet you do have the protection. There's so much misinformation that all I can tell you is that you need to buy our DVD or do some extensive research and read on your own. Finishing is a tough subject. We've got alcohol-based dyes. We've got water-based dyes. We've got water-based finishes. We've got solvent-based finishes. They're going to try to make you believe that a water-based finish is, it's perfectly safe. That's not correct. It has solvents in it. They're not going to tell you that. You've got stains that you go to the box stores and buy. Some of them are a pigment base, which means it's got color mixed in oil. You've got some that are actually an oil-based dye. What's the difference in a dye and a stain? You have to know these things. You have to know what does what and where to use it. If you go out here and you build something out of pine and you throw a dye on it, I don't care if it's water, alcohol, or oil, and you just put it on there, you're going to have a mess. If you use a gel stain, you're going to get a lot better result. Why? These are things you need to know. and there's just not enough time in this DVD to go into it. I think that our finishing DVD is 3 or more hours long, something like that. And there's still a lot we could have gone. We're actually beyond that. We're going to do an advanced finish. It's that complex. But this is fundamentals. These are the basics. Okay. All I can tell you is this: is going out, buying something, smeared it on there, and thinking you're going to get a really nice result is not correct. And the biggest tip I can give you is that keep a sample of whatever it is you're doing out of whatever you're doing. Keep a little scraps around, okay, so that you can sand them or scrape them or do whatever you're doing to your project, do to them, so you can test them, okay? It'll keep you from a lot of frustration and a lot of heartache. All right, guys, we're going to wrap this up. But before we go, I want to talk about a few more basics. Things I feel that are absolute necessities. You can buy them in all kind of price ranges. This is a moisture meter. And simply put, what it does is you can lay it on a piece of wood and you can measure how much moisture is in it. Wood expands and contracts. Wood movement is an ongoing issue. A big wide panel in anything, it's going to expand and contract. For the most part, it expands and contracts across its width. It doesn't grow in length. In your construction and in your building, you have to know how to accommodate for these things. You have to know the difference between a joint and an attachment. You have to know how to put moldings on where you have the grain running one way and a molding grain running the other way. You can't glue them on. If you do, then you stop the movement. You have to know your moisture content of wood. You need to know what's a good percentage for a furniture wood that's going into your house. You have to know that when you plane a piece of wood and you open it up, that you've taken the crust off. Kind of like taking a loaf of bread out of the plastic. Take it out, leave it set on the counter. It all dries out in a very short time uniformly, especially if you take the crust off. We call that acclimation. Any good woodworker is going to tell you what you can't go to the mill or to the box store and buy some wood and come back and just start building with it. You've got to acclimate it. You've got to let it adjust itself to an environment that it's going to be living in. These are things that are super important, and these are the things that's going to make your projects last for generation after generation. You know, in my world, we have one warranty. We have one guarantee, and that is we guarantee every piece we make for my lifetime. If you scratch it, you bring it over, we'll fix it. We was fortunate enough way early on to learn from some really good folks and some really old timers about wood movement, finishing, and these kind of things. And we've built with some really huge stuff. We've never had anything split, crack, or nothing. We just haven't. And it's not that we know everything, and it's not that we walk on water. That's not it at all. It's that some of the principles that they instilled and some of the things they taught, they've been around for a long, long time. And in today's world where everything's hurry up, rush, get it, go, in woodworking, you just got to slow down just a little. With that said, that's why I think you need a moisture meter. You need to know where it's at, and you need to know where it's got to go. That said, we're going to move on. You need a good drill. I'm going to say this again. I can't afford to buy cheap tools. Here was a drill that somebody bought for $24.95 or something. It's an 18 bolt. After about 2 minutes, it ain't got enough to do nothing. But it's got 2 batteries. It's a good thing. Here's a drill that's an 18 bolt that hangs right in there with us, buddy. And here's a drill that's an 18 bolt that'll break your arm. Alright? There's a massive difference in the dollars in these pieces. You can buy drills, little cordless drills that have angles on them for tight places. They're nice to have. You can go out, you can spend hundreds of dollars. Chisels, you gotta have chisels. Chisels are one of the lightning, you just gotta have them. You can use chisels to chisel mortises, clean corners, and do all kind of things. Cut dovetails, everything. You need a really good set of chisels. Here's a set of chisels, probably as nice as any you're gonna go buy. They're expensive, but they're good. Here's a set of chisels. They got a plastic handle on them. They're made by a company called Mortise. Fine Woodworking, American Woodworker, one of them did a rating. Those chisels are a third what these are. They're not as pretty. They usually don't come in a fancy case, but there's good chisels out there. Here's your old Stanley Chisels you see at the box stores. These are made for chiseling out a hunk of out a 2x4 to get a wire through, or to get. These are construction grade. They got a big old. They're made for the work. If that's what you need. They're your toy. When you're in your woodworking, you need to mark things. We prefer 5mm lead pencil. I don't have to run sharpening, and they're pretty economical, and they give me a nice little fine line. But when I'm getting down to the fine details of things, I like a knife, a really fine line. And when I'm getting down to the really nitty gritty of it, there's not a whole lot out there that beats a good old X-Acto knife. You can buy marking knives and everything else. These do really nice. Layout marking and lines, a nice little scribe marker does good, especially for dovetails. You need some good files or rasp. You need some good aggressive rasp, half rounds. Probably this flat half round cabinet maker's rasp. If I was going to buy one, that would be it. But you're going to find the need for round ones, flat ones, files. Files help smooth wood. They're not real good for sharpening your tools. If your tools are to the point that you think you can sharpen them with a file, and that's going to be sufficient, you're not sharp enough. This is a Japanese rasp. It's fine on one side, rough on the other. This one has the handle out of it. Here's one's got the handle in it, and you can remove it. Outside of the half round cabinet maker's rasp, this is my tool of choice. This is a dynamite rasp. It flat gets it done. This is a good tool. If you're going to buy, there's all kind of planes out there. But starting out, if I can only buy one plane, I'd have to get me a nice little block plane, nice little low angle smoother. If I could only own one, this would be it. You need a good compass. You need good measuring and marking. You need a good tape measure. You need good fixed measurements. Laying out, these are a little more exact. You need really good squares, and you need to make sure they're square. Cheap squares are exactly what they imply. They're cheap squares. And they're slammed through some big factory, and if something gets off, out the door they go. Because predominantly they're made for the construction industry, where, as we all well know, square means close to, almost. We have an expression, it's called noun, and noun can be from that to that. You're going to find specialty tools. These are tools you really need, okay? But you're going to find your ones. Here's a spoke shave. Here's another spoke shave. These are used for shaping, smoothing wood. you're going to get what you pay for. That's one thing I can't hammer into you enough. If you go out here and you buy a $500 saw and a $75 router, and you want to make tater bends or little whatnots, it might do the job for you. If you're going to be serious about what you're doing, save your dollars and try to do a little better. That's just the truth, guys. You're going to get what you pay for. You just can't afford to risk your safety on anything less. Good tools cost. Here's the other side. Good tools are an investment. You can go out here and if you've got a good quality anything and you decide you want to sell it and move up a notch, you can sell it and recover a lot of your money. If you've got some little cheap thing, then find a yard sale, guys, because that's the best you're going to do. Guys, I've covered everything I know of that I can humanly cover. This DVD's gotten a whole lot longer, like a lot of them do, than I had planned. But I didn't know where to really stop, and I wanted to give you the basics. I hope I haven't confused you. I'm going to say that again. But I had to cover such a vast area because I'm talking to such a large audience and not knowing what your needs are. If you're getting into it and you're beginning, or if you're into it and you want to go another direction and you're not sure, the end of this DVD will be my email. It's also on the back of your cover. Give me an email. Tell me what you're doing, what you want to do, and if I can, I'll give you some suggestions. It's been real nice having you in my shop, and I hope to see you down the road.